You're listening to the NABS Now podcast, brought to you by the National Association of Blind Students, a proud division of the National Federation of the Blind.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the NABS Now podcast. I'm your host Nina, and today we have an episode for you all about diversity. We have done a diversity episode before, but we decided to put a different spin on this one by talking to some of our diversity leaders and past leaders in NABS. So we're going to jump right in, and I hope you find this episode as informational and informative as I have.
My name is Bartelt. I am the president of the Illinois Association of Blind Students. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm attending school online through Northern Colorado University to be a teacher of blind students.
My name is Monica Wegner. I am a blind queer woman from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Recently graduated from law school, so no longer a student. I served on the NABS board in the 2020-21 year, and I was chair of the NABS Diversity and Inclusion Committee.
Hello, my name is Qualik. I am from Maryland. I am African American. I am currently the Maryland Association of Blind Students president, and I also served alongside Monica as the one of the co-chairs of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sara from Chicago, Illinois. I am a Mexican-American, African-American, cis, hetero, female, and I just graduated with my bachelor's in history and communications from North Park University, and I previously served as co-chair of the NABS D&I committee. I currently serve as the co-chair of the Illinois D&I committee, and I'm first vice president of the Illinois Association of Blind Students.
Well, I'm really excited that you all could be here with us today, and we're kind of going to do a little bit of a different style of podcast. We're going to do more of a roundtable type discussion so that you all can share your ideas and also bounce them off of one another. So I'll start with my first question. What feeds your passion for diversity and inclusion?
So for me, my passion for diversity and inclusion really comes from the fact that every time I look at this topic, I learn something. It's such a deep space, and there's so much to learn. I come away from every discussion and every experience with a learning. So it's almost selfish in some ways.
It's interesting because, like Monica, I feel like my drive for diversity and inclusion is also kind of selfish in the sense that, like, I just want to know more about different intersectionalities and different people and kind of how those different groups want to be represented. Because as an African American male, like, I know that, we have, struggles being represented, especially in America. And so wanting to kind of derail false narratives and share positive information that can, help better the world around us, and also to take in information to learn about, people and different ideas and intersectionalities around me. So that's kind of what drives me.
I guess mine's a little different because personally not ethnic myself. I'm a white person, but I took a lot of ethnic studies classes in school, and that always really interests me about different backgrounds and nationalities and different cultures. But then I also think about my mom's side of the family. I consider Sicilian, and back in the 60s, they were basically told that this is your house, we're ripping your house down, and you have 60 days to get out no matter what. And I always thought how different cultures from back in different areas of history kind of dealt with the same things of not being wanted here in the United States in different ways, kind of like, and how all the cultures kind of mix together in some way or another.
I definitely concur with my colleagues. I chose to study history as one of my majors, and for quite some time, I, like many people, just learned the master narrative of history that focused on the wealthy landowning populations. And my question was, well, what about the people we don't learn about? What about the women? What about the Native Americans? What about the people who don't identify on the gender binary? What about everybody who is ignored and marginalized? And so definitely it's a pursuit of knowledge, but it's also a pursuit of understanding the people who are marginalized and ignored and minimized in society. And it's definitely a reason why I studied communications, was because I want to know all the things that affect how we engage with the world and with each other. And so definitely about educating myself and others and trying to limit those inequalities.
That's a really good point, Sarah. And it got me to thinking about kind of one of the other reasons I do this, in that, like, in corporations and in a lot of groups that I'm in, I don't see anyone like me in a lot of different spaces. And so part of doing diversity and inclusion is about, like, getting more people who are Black and who are BIPOC and who are queer into these spaces where, you know, they're just not represented. That is really important to me, because I just don't see it a lot of times.
I think that's one thing that the NFB and NABS and different affiliates have really focused on in the last couple of years, is having a space for everyone that feels included. But it wasn't like that when I first joined the NFB, like 12, 13 years ago. So I think the NFB has came a long way.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, the idea boils down to community. And here in the NFB, like, we are driven by the community of blindness, but I think it is crucial, and it's something that we've come to be aware of, which is that we need to acknowledge that there are other communities that intersect with blindness, and instead of dismissing them or pushing them away, that we're bringing them together and creating a larger community, and also giving people access to different communities that they identify with outside of blindness, because I think that helps, that strengthens, like, being around other African American leaders shows me that that there is a hope that I can reach that kind of upper echelons. And so it's definitely a motivator, but it's a learning experience too, because a lot of times when you get to have these kind of communities and stuff that that we're trying to cultivate, there's just a lot of knowledge sharing and experience sharing.
Yeah, and it goes both ways too, because as blind people, we want to be a part of other communities. So it's not, it cuts both ways.
Exactly.
I think that's a really good point that you both just made about intersectionalities and having a space in communities for all of those intersectionalities. That actually kind of leads into my next question. So how do you feel that your personal identities affect the work that you do?
I think for me, it allows me to be more in touch with the people I work with. I think that, growing up as someone who kind of struggled for a lot of the things that I wanted, and, growing up with a lot of adversity, not because of my blindness in particular, but because of me being African American and me living in a low income household, and me living in a single mother household, and having different issues like that. It definitely makes it easier to empathize with other people, especially people in the blind community who face discrimination and adversity because of their blindness. I don't know. I guess it's just experience, that experience that I've gotten from my culture, because of the limitations put on the people in my community. I definitely just feel like that is also, almost like exactly what happens in other communities, especially blindness and other disabilities. So it kind of helps me come at it like humbly and with a certain fervor.
I definitely agree with you, Q. I would say for me, like my background definitely helps me have like empathy for other people as well, and definitely like fundamentally believing in the equality that we should all have. Because like I'm Black and Mexican, and so throughout a large portion of American history, African Americans were enslaved, and reading about all of those inequalities and reading about the marginalization that other communities have gone through. And for example, like I didn't get to learn Mexican history until I was in college, and that like fundamentally bothers me. And so very much like because I studied the marginalization of so many people, that very much fundamentally strengthened my resolve that we all deserve basic human rights and we all deserve equality. And for example, like last year, Illinois passed a bill that mandates that public schools teach LGBTQ history, and that I very much commend my state for doing that, because yes, like I did get to learn some African American history, and it was very limited, and I didn't get to learn any Mexican history in my public schooling. And I'm so happy that children with who belong to the LGBTQ community will get to learn about people who had similar experiences to them in their history classes. And they just signed a new bill that's going to mandate teaching Asian American history in public schooling. And I'm so happy for all of these young people who are going to grow up knowing history of the people who they can identify with, because I believe that everyone deserves to know that other people were historically significant. Everyone deserves to know that they can accomplish their dreams.
I think for me, my identity, both as a queer person and as a blind person, helps me spot gaps sometimes. So as a blind person working in corporate America, for example, one thing that I notice is there are a lot of blind people in accessibility. And so what does it take to, in a corporation with an accessibility program, what does it take to get blind folks employed in other areas of the company? Like, let's not silo them in accessibility. And at the same time, when I look at diversity within the Federation, I notice as well, like queer representation in leadership is, can always be improved. That's not to say there isn't representation in leadership. There certainly is, but being aware of it, being conscious of it, and trying to improve that is always a thing worth doing. And that doesn't just apply to queerness. It applies to race and to gender and all the things.
Both of you have really good points, because like how I see it, what you were talking about, Monica, is diversity is always going to be a good thing. Like diversity is, I don't know, it's a strength in there, in my opinion. Like when you have diverse opinions, when you have more of an array of people in different places, better ideas and better like results come from it, and it's proven. And so like looking at the NFB, I think when you have such a talented group of people that are from different backgrounds and that represent different things, like you look at this D&I committee, and I feel like we're able to drum up really cool ideas and talk about really different, like a very vast array of things, because we all have different things that make us like unique. And I think on the flip side is, yeah, like blind people do get put into these little holes, and I think sometimes like we feel like we have to become TVIs, like that's the only thing we can do. We have to want to work at a training center, like that's the only thing we can do. We have to work in accessibility, or we have to be a lawyer. And it's because like we feel like we can only break into certain fields, but that's not how it should be. We should be able to kind of grow and do whatever. If we want to be, the CEO of a company, we should be able to do that. Or if we want to be, America's Next Top Model, like we should be able to do that. And I think, diversity anywhere is always going to be a better thing. So knowing that allows you, and allows me in particular, to kind of put that into my work on a D&I level for NABS.
I just say like from the teaching like experience, like I chose to be a teacher. It's not like I knew I couldn't be a general education teacher. I actually have had some internships and worked with private students. So like I know personally, like firsthand, it's not impossible. I think a lot of times part of the diversity is teaching our blind students who are going out into the workforce here the tricks and tips to work in the sighted world and areas that are not just blindness driven career. I think that's one thing we should be working on in our student divisions and in our diversity and inclusion meetings and stuff like that, because for now it's gonna be around blind people. Even like when I am a TBI, I'm still gonna have to work with general education teachers. I'm still gonna have to work with parents and all sorts of other people on the staff. So it's more to it than just like working with blind students.
So Qualik was saying how there's always going to be strengths of D&I. And that leads into my next question. Do you think that there will always be a need for diversity and inclusion? And by that I mean specific efforts dedicated to diversity and inclusion, whatever that may look like in your imagination.
I think yes, because the need for diversity and inclusion efforts arose because segments of society were clearly being marginalized, and there were different societal standards and expectations that very much hindered the success and the societal acceptance of so many people. And say if we did achieve some kind of equality for queer people and for Black people and for Asian American people, it's one of the things that just diversity and inclusion just never ends, because if you stop the efforts, then it just opens the door for another community to be marginalized in the future and to get to slip through the cracks. So there are always efforts. There should always be an effort to make things equal for people in society and to help everyone succeed, because there are social, political, and economic inequalities in this world. If people aren't working towards minimizing those inequalities, then there's always going to be some people who are marginalized.
For me, this is a really hard question because, like, could we get to a point in our society where we could just celebrate our differences as humans and live in that kind of situation while acknowledging our history? I would love it if we could. I would, yeah. So am I prepared to say that there will always be a need for diversity and inclusion? I don't think I can say that. I think there will be a need for it in our generation, but could we get to a stage where there isn't? I would love it if we could.
Like one thing I think about diversity for the future is that it's still going to be a topic because people that are in power most of the time don't really think about diversity and inclusion that much and just think about what's going to help their company or what's good or what's going to make money for their company. And that's, I think, there's always going to be a place for diversity and inclusion and just a safe place for people to come and talk that are facing the same issues or just want to talk about like, how they feel about the workplace or being in the NFB and just having the groups in the NFB and the certain workshops that we have during National Convention for all different types of groups and everything. You know, I've really learned a lot from a lot of these meetings and from hearing from other people. So I think having a place for people to come and share is always going to be important in any type of environment.
You know, it's interesting because the optimist in me wants to believe that it's possible for us to reach a point where we don't need a D&I committee or don't need to talk about diversity because people won't be ignorant and they will actually think about it and they will realize that there are different people in this world and all of them have different cultures and different backgrounds and different intersectionalities. But I think I'm gonna be honest, I'm just a cynic. And I think part of that is because, I have conversations with my grandmother, and, she thought that my mom's generation was going to be the generation where Black people were going to be treated equally. And my mom's generation thought that my generation was going to be the generation where Black people were treated equally. And, I kind of hope that my kids' generation, that generation, but realistically, it's just been proven to kind of be for naught. And that kind of sucks, right? Like, that really sucks to say that, while we've made progress, it sometimes feels like we've not made progress. Like, we take 5 steps forward and 10 steps backward, or like we go like 5 steps forward and then like someone like scoots us over to the side and they're like, well, it's all good. We're still moving straight, sort of. But it's like with D&I, I think there's good and bad, right? Like, I think it's terrible that, like, because of just the ignorance, or the fact that the system isn't structured for people to learn about different cultures and intersectionalities is the way it is, like, that I don't know if we'll ever be able to get to that point. But I think the other thing is that I think it's okay to have committees like this and people devoted to making sure that we're staying up to date and that we're staying current, and that we're making sure that we're including everyone and that everyone's represented, and that information is being disseminated about how people want to be treated in different groups. And so in terms of, information disseminated and all that, I think, like, it can be a good thing to have a D&I committee and to continue for that to kind of almost be a permanent idea, that we have someone to make sure that we are getting that kind of information. But I realistically would love it if we could get to a point where we didn't need, a group of people to be like, hey, I exist, and the system has been oppressing me, and like the system is kind of stacked against me, and this needs to change. But I don't know if we'll ever actually reach that point.
So I have a follow-up question for you, because you brought up a really interesting point about how a lot of times generations kind of have the hope that the next generation will be the one to either make the change or experience the change. And I know that you kind of brought attention to the fact that that doesn't always pan out like you hope it will. And as humans, we're kind of optimistic sometimes, and sometimes overly so. But I want to inquire about the fact that, do you think that that hope is valuable? Because if people didn't have hope that, I heard this quote today, and it was, the challenge can turn into the change. Don't know where it came from, but I thought it was good, considering we're recording today. So if people don't have the hope that all of these challenges and all of this oppression can turn into change, would people still be doing the work that they do? Do you think that that hope does have a place in D&I? Because without it, I don't know the answer to this, but would there be, enough motivation for people to sometimes do something, like you said, that kind of feels like a losing battle?
No, I think the hope is super important. The hope is the reason why we're even here. The hope is the reason why we're having this conversation. I think hope is what drives us, because at a certain point, like, you get to 60, 70, 90 years old. My grandmother, like, she can be kind of jaded, and the reason is because sometimes her hope runs low, and sometimes she just doesn't have enough motivation. And then, like, but then she'll see things like, like when I became the male student division president, she saw me rising to a position of leadership. It excites her, right? It makes her feel like that there's still hope, right? And so it's the hope that's gonna rally the forces, right? Like, no military will be successful without morale. Well, for us on the political battlefield, on the social battlefield, hope is what's going to drive us. So it's our morale. So I think it's always going to be something that we're going to need. I think that it's good to have. I think sometimes it's hard because, like, hope, it feels like, it feels so fleeting sometimes, or it feels like, should we have to hope for something? It should just be an absolute, right? Like, we shouldn't have to hope that we'll be treated as equals. It should be an absolute that we're treated as equals. Like, we shouldn't have to hope that we'll get our human rights, but it should be an absolute. But I think as long as we have that hope, and as long as we continue to see progress too in certain directions, then I think that, yeah, that hope is there, and it's definitely justifiable, and it's important for the movement. and for mankind.
I agree with that this work does require hope, and it also requires a bit of selflessness too. It makes me think of like the suffragettes and like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. They fought tirelessly to get women the right to vote, and they didn't even get to live to see it. And I think that so many people worked tirelessly for for suffrage and for the Equal Rights Amendment and for things like the Civil Rights Act. And so many people didn't get to experience the benefits of those outcomes, and it required so much selflessness on the part of so many people to push for change, and change that they themselves wouldn't get to see, but that their children and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren would get to experience and take advantage of in the future. So yeah, it's a lot of work, and it requires some selflessness, but like without hope, then it's a massive driving factor in all of this.
I think I am a bit of an optimist in that I think that the best time to live in our history is always now. I think the world is better now than it was 20 years ago, and it was better 20 years ago than it was 50 years ago. We do keep improving from generation to generation. It's just more incremental than we might want it to be.
I also think, I don't know, and this might sound a little like, very much a little bit like my war example. I think to lose hope, like to take away the idea of hope, is to almost give in, right? Like give in to the idea of systemic like problems, like to say, okay, whatever, the system is whatever it is, and we're just gonna have to live with it. Because then then we're like, for instance, you look at the George Floyd case, and you're like, if we didn't have hope that, rallying together and protesting and pushing the fact that this is something that is wrong and should never happen, it would have just been swept under the rug. And it would have just been another case, and people would have thrown their hands up and be like, yeah, this happens. So I think hope definitely drives us. And I think, Monica, you're right. Like, do we continue to move forward? Yeah. It just, like you said, it's very incremental. But it's also, sometimes it's hard because, like, I think we're all searching for the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's different for everyone. And, it's hard to predict if we can reach that light, or if, we're always just kind of going to be moving and shuffling incremental steps. Like, I think the last thing is, I think sometimes it's hard because some of the things that we're fighting for are very basic. Like, they're very realistic. They're very, like, they're so absurdly, like,
Fundamental.
common sense. Like you just kind of wonder to yourself, like, how is this not something that we've worked out already? And I think sometimes that's the hard part. It's like it's the fact that it's so fundamentally like right and wrong, like clear cut. It's so fundamentally clear cut that that's where it kind of gets hard, and that's when kind of hope can be kind of like shifty, and it feels hard because it's just like sometimes the most clear cut things seem to be the things that are the farthest away from us.
I think a lot of it will help with hope is people listening to other people about issues and just having an open mind about like what's going on in the culture and the community. Because if you're willing to listen to other people that have different experiences than you do, and just be willing to help in any way that's possible, I think that will help a lot in the future and now.
What advice would you give to those who are still trying to find their place in the D&I space, or maybe you're unsure if they have a place in D&I work at all?
My advice would be to listen to voices that are not like yours. I think that's probably the most important thing you can do. If you're in the workplace and you notice that a woman gets cut off or her idea is dismissed and then repeated 5 minutes later by a man, and that idea is endorsed, stand up for that. Like that is a hard, concrete thing that you can do in that space. And I think once you start listening to voices that aren't like yours, you will find ways to contribute.
I think it's a lot of it is just that having an open mind and not judging anyone for how they feel or how they interact with other people or how you interact with other people, but being willing to learn about other cultures and other groups and that type of thing. And if you're not sure about something, ask questions. I know, I think a while back ago, I had some questions about the LGBT community, and I asked Monica some questions. Just finding people that you feel comfortable with to ask questions to and just learn more information without being biased.
I would say to celebrate diversity and to foster inclusion throughout society, we need everyone's participation, not just people who are considered to be of marginalized backgrounds. We need everyone to participate and to and to fundamentally believe in everyone's equal rights. So I would say that you should get involved because we need everyone to change society for the better.
I think that people are afraid because they look at it as a political issue, or they look at it as something that is going to be divisive and aggressive. But I think, remember that D&I is a community. Like, we're trying to foster a community of mutually shared knowledge, and where we honestly, it's beyond a community, a family, right? We want to share knowledge. We want to be there for each other. We want to stand up for each other. We want to listen when others need us to listen. And so I think if you go into it and understand that you're just looking for a place in the family, and sometimes that means you just need to listen. Sometimes that means you need to ask. Sometimes that means you need to celebrate. I think just finding your role in the family, but treating it as a family is the way to go. Don't think of it as a political issue. Don't think of it as something that's, wars need to be fought over. Look at it like a family, and you're embracing your family, and that you're coming into the family, and that just like in your own family, you have a role, and that you can settle into that.
It's said that the best ally to a minority group is a cisgender, straight, white man, because he has so much power in the world. It's just getting him to wield that power. So wield your power. Dr. King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice."
The power to change the world comes from the power to change ourselves. Unknown.
Thank you to our special guests Sara, Qualik, Monica, and Ellen. This episode has been so illuminating, and I hope that all of you have enjoyed it as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.